welcome to another episode on Promotion Exam Study Made Easy. This is where we simplify the method of study such that you don't stress your eyes reading through book all day. Instead of that, you can just play at your comfort zone and listen. And you can play it over and over, whereby you now assimilate so much. So this is the revised public service rules, which approval for review was given in 2021, and the reviewed version became effective in the year 2023. We've been treating it for a while. So on this video, we shall be looking at emoluments and increments. Previously, we looked at the general definitions as contained in the revised public service rule, then the appointments and leaving the service, and under that we had 4 episodes that considered that rounded the appointment and leaving the service up in 4 episodes. Then we proceeded to discipline. In discipline, we had 2 episodes that covered everything on discipline. Then leave, then we had performance management system, then key changes in the revised public service rule, petition and appeal. And the last video was on allowances. So this video we shall be looking at emoluments and increments, and there we shall consider emoluments and then increment rules. So before we proceed, if you are yet to subscribe to this channel, kindly hit the subscribe button now. If you are just coming across this channel for the first time, or you've been visiting but have not subscribed, definitely you will now see within your screen where it is written subscribe. It can be on white background or black background or any background. You see it on your page. If you are still seeing it on your page, means you have not hit the subscribe button before. So kindly hit on it right now before we proceed. And the essence of doing that is to make available all our lesson materials to you, to your page, so that YouTube will be able to make them available to your page, so you don't miss any one, both the previously uploaded one and the ones we upload later. You have access to them and you don't miss anyone. That's just the essence of subscribing. It's free of charge. It's not costing you a dime. So going forward, emoluments and increments. As I said, we are considering emoluments and the increment rules. So payment of emoluments. Financial regulations contain guidance on the payment of emoluments and wages. The emoluments on appointment. On first appointment, emoluments shall, as a general rule, be paid as from the date of assumption of duty. All officers shall be placed on IPPIS platform within 2 months of assumption of duty. Then emoluments on transfer from other scheduled services. A staff on transfer shall be eligible for the emolument attached to his new office with effect from the date he assumes duty. Then emoluments on promotion within incremental scales. Except in a case of a promotion from a non-pensionable to a pensionable office, the following rules shall apply where an officer is promoted in the ordinary course within federal public service to an office carrying emolument on an incremental scale. 1. If the officer is promoted to a grade level that does not overlap his old grade level, he will be placed at the minimum point of his new salary grade level. If his emolument in the former post is higher than the minimum point of the new salary grade level, he will be placed on the next point higher than his former emolument after taking into consideration the increment he would have earned if he had not been promoted. 3. Payment of promotion arrears shall be made within the year promotion is effected. Then definitions. The increment rules. Increment is predetermined amount added to the annual emolument of an officer every calendar year. That is the definition of increment. Is a predetermined amount added to the annual emolument of an officer every calendar year. Then end, that is increment, a predetermined amount added to the annual emolument of officer every calendar year. Then we have end increment. An officer on an incremental grade level shall normally be granted an increment unless he is on interdiction or suspension or has a disciplinary action pending against him or on an account of poor performance. Then we have differing and withholding of which increment, which is part of the incremental date. The incremental date of an officer appointed or promoted to a post in the federal public service shall be 1st January of the year following at least 6 months of service or promotion. So it's 1st January of the year following at least 6 months of the service or the promotion. Then grant for withholding or differing increments. The grant of an increment may be deferred or withheld in accordance with the provisions of the rule. Then in deciding which penalty to impose or recommend, a permanent secretary or head of extraministerial office will take into account the gravity of the shortcoming and the quality of the officer's previous service, bearing in mind that to withhold an increment is a more serious penalty than to defer it. Then we have deferred increment. An officer's increment is deferred when the decision as to whether or not it shall be granted is postponed for a specific period. Now, these are conditions for deferment. The period must be fixed at the time the increment is deferred and must not be less than 3 months or nor more than 6 months. So at the point of deferment, the duration of the deferment must be stated, and it shall never be less than 3 months or more than 6 months. Then if it is less than 6 months in the first instance, it may, if necessary, be increased to 6 months by additional specific deferment. Then if a deferred increment is eventually granted, it does not become effective until the day following the expiration of the specific period of deferment. So it takes effect a day after the specific period of deferment, not that same date of the after, a day after following it, the expiration day of the deferment. However, the recipient retains his original incremental date for subsequent increments. So the recipient does not lose his incremental date, it still retains it for subsequent ones. Then if a deferred increment is not granted at or before the expiration of 6 months from the date it was originally due, it must be withheld. So the maximum duration for withholding increment, for deferring increment, is 6 months. So if it's 6 months, then it has to be withheld. Then, for example, now assuming Okafor is due to proceed from earning 147,968 naira to earning 152,950 naira per annum on 1st January 2005. Then he had his increment deferred. If he has his increment deferred for 3 months, then his salary shall remain at that amount of 147,968 naira until the 31st of the March. So until the 31st of March 2005, that is 3 months deferment. when his permanent secretary or head of extraministerial office must decide whether or not to grant the deferred increment. Then if he grants it, the officer draws monthly emolument at 152,950 naira. That is the new salary and the increment for the period 1st of April, that is after the 3 months, so the next month from the 1st of the 4th month, now 2005, then to the end of the year, 31st December 2005. That is the remaining 9 months of the year. So because it was deferred for 3 months, so after the 3 months, it is lifted and he will start drawing his normal increment until the end of the year. And then he retains his original incremental date of 1st January for consideration of his next increment to 157,932 naira. So the subsequent year, he goes back to his date of increment of 1st January. Then we have withheld increment. An officer's increment is withheld when it is decided not to grant it, and that he shall cease to be eligible thereof until his next incremental date. The withholding of an increment thus results in the emolument of the officer in question remaining for the rest of his incremental service years, one increment behind what would have been had the increment not been withheld, unless the Federal Civil Service Commission exercises the authority described in the Public Service Rule. So once the increment is withheld, so the officer loses that 1 year increment, and it will have for the rest of the service. So except the Federal Civil Service Commission decide to give what they call special increment. Then, for example, an officer due to proceed from 147,968 naira to 152,950 naira per annum on 1st January 2005 had his increment withheld. So the increment is withheld. Then his emolument should remain at 147,968 naira throughout the period of 1st January 2005 to 31st December 2005, and he cannot proceed to receive 152,950 naira until 1st January 2006. That is 1 year. So his next incremental date, until his next incremental date, that means he loses the increment for that year until the next due date for increment, which is always 1st January. The increments not restored in retrospect. An increment deferred or withheld cannot be restored with retrospective effect in consequence of improved service during a later increment earning period. The notice to restore increment. Immediately needing to restore an increment which had earlier been withdrawn or deferred, the permanent secretary or head of extraministerial office shall bring the decision to the notice of the officer. Then we have special increments to mitigate lasting effects of withheld increments. When an officer's increment has been withheld under the rule, the civil service, then the Federal Civil Service Commission at a subsequent incremental date grant one or more special increments of raising the salary of the to or towards the level it would have reached if the previous withholding has not occurred. So that is special increment. Then we have communication of deferred or withheld increments. Then all decisions on deferment or withholding of increment and stoppage of salaries shall be communicated to the office of the Accountant General of the Federation, then office of the Auditor General for the Federation, and office of the Head of Civil Service of the Federation, as well as to the officer concerned within 2 weeks. So these are the places that communication must go for the deferment or stoppage of salary or withholding shall go. The Accountant General of the Federation must be communicated. The office of the Auditor General for the Federation must be communicated. Then the office of the Head of Civil Service of the Federation must be communicated. And of course, the officer involved must be communicated. And all this must happen within 2 weeks. Now we are on to the quiz. So having gone through the lesson on emoluments and increments, now the quiz, as usual, I always say, always try to attempt each question before the correct final answer is seen. So for each question, try to attempt your answer before we finally see the correct answer. So for question 1, it says, which of these contains guidance on the payment of emolument and wages? We have A, Civil Service Handbook, B, Accountant General Publication, C, Gazette Publication, and D, Financial Regulations. So note your answer. Question 2. As a general rule on first appointment, from when shall emolument be paid? So when shall emolument be paid? Then A, from the issued was issued. B, from appointment letter was C, from the date of assumption of duty, and D, from the date the appointment was gazetted. Question 3. Is it expected that appointed shall be placed BIS platform? A, within 2 months of assumption of duty. B, issuing appointment. C, within 3 months of assumption of duty, and D, the month of submission of acceptance letter of offer of appointment. Noting your answer now, cross check. Let's see the correct answers. So for question 1 that says, which of these contains guidance on the payment of emolument and wages? It is the Financial Regulations that contains that guidance on payment of wages and emoluments and wages. Financial Regulations, that is option D. 2 that says as a general rule, from when shall emolument be paid? So emolument shall be paid date of assumption of duty. Option C, from the date of assumption of duty. Then question 3 that says, when is it expected that appointed place shall be placed on IPPI's platform? Of course, an appointed officer shall be placed on IPPIS platform within 2 months. That is of duty. That is option A, within 2 months of assumption of duty. So question 4. Which of these statements is correct on transfer from other scheduled service? So which of the statements refer to emoluments on transfer from other scheduled services? A staff on transfer shall be eligible for the emolument attached to his previous office. B, a staff on transfer shall be eligible for the emoluments attached to his new office with effect from the date he assumes duty. C, a staff on transfer shall be eligible for the emolument attached to his new office with effect from the date the transfer letter was issued. Then D, a staff on transfer shall continue to withdraw his emolument from the office he was transferred from. Then question 5. When an officer is promoted to a grade that does not overlap his old grade, how will he be placed for the purpose of emolument? A, he will be placed at a minimum point of his new salary grade level. B, he will be placed at the next 2 points of his new salary grade level. And C, he will be placed at the next point of his old salary grade level, and then D, he will be placed at a best point of his new salary grade level. So the correct answers, so for question 4 that says, which of these statements is correct with respect to emoluments on transfer from one scheduled service? So the statement that is correct there is that, let's look at it again, that a staff on transfer shall be eligible for the emolument attached to his new office with effect from the date he assumes duty. That is option B. So he'll be attached, he'll be eligible for the emoluments attached to his new office with effect from the date he assumes duty. Then for question 5 that says, when an officer is promoted to a grade level that does not overlap his old grade level, he will be placed for the purpose. How will he be placed for the purpose of emoluments? Of course, he'll be placed at a minimum point of his new salary grade level. He'll be placed at a minimum point of his new salary grade level, except if the old one still is higher than the minimum point. But if not, he'll be placed at the minimum point of the new salary grade level. That is option A. So question 4, the correct option is B, and 5, correct option is A. Questions: when an officer is promoted to a grade level in which his emolument in the former post is higher than the minimum point of the new salary grade level, how will he be placed? A, he will be placed on the next 2 points higher than his former emolument after taking into consideration the increment he would have earned if he had not been promoted. B, he will be placed on the next point higher than his former emolument after taking into consideration the increment he would have earned if he had not been promoted. C, will be placed at a minimum new salary of his new salary grade level. And D, so this should be D, and D, he will be placed at a maximum point of his former salary grade level. So question 7, when shall payment for promotion arrears be made? A, promotion exam was conducted. B, it shall be made within the year the officer is due for promotion. And C, it shall be made within the year promotion is effected. And D, it shall be made within the year promotion letter was issued. So looking at the correct options, so question 6 that says, when an officer is promoted to a grade level in which his emolument in the former post is higher than the minimum point of, how will he be placed? And of course, he'll be placed on the next point. That is option B. He'll be placed on the next point higher than his former emolument after taking into consideration the increment he would have earned if he had not been promoted. For question 7 that says, when shall payment for promotion arrears be made? Of course, payment for promotion arrears shall be made within the year promotion is effected. It shall be made within the year promotion is effected. That is option C. So C, number 6, the correct option is B, and 7, the correct option is C. Question 8. What is increment? What is increment? A, is a predetermined amount added to the annual emolument of an officer after every promotion. B, is an amount added to the annual emolument of an officer every calendar month of appointment. Then C, is a predetermined non-taxable amount added to the monthly salary of an officer. And then D, is a predetermined amount added to the annual emolument of an officer every calendar year. Question 9. Which of is not a condition for an increment not to be granted? to an officer on an incremental grade level. So which is not a condition for an increment not to be granted to an officer. So option A, if the officer is on interdiction or suspension. Then B, if the officer has an account of poor performance. C, if the officer is on study leave with pay. Then D, if the officer has a disciplinary action pending against him. So quickly going back to the correct options. So for question A that says, what is increment? What is increment? Of course, increment is a predetermined amount added to the annual emolument of an officer every calendar year. Every calendar year. While question 9 that says, which of these is not a condition for an increment not to be granted? So looking at the options, when the officer is on interdiction or suspension, the increment of course will not be granted. So that one is a condition for it not to be granted. And of course, if the officer is on account of poor performance, is also a condition for it not to be granted. But if the officer is on study leave with pay, that is not a condition for increment not to be granted. So the correct option is C. And then of course option D that says, if the officer has if the officer has a disciplinary action, is also a condition for it not to be granted. So the correct option is option C, that the officer is on study leave is not a condition for increment not to be granted. So for question 8, the correct option is D, predetermined amount added to emolument of an officer every calendar year. And option for question 9, the correct option is C, if the officer is on study leave, is not a condition for increment not to be granted. So question 10, what shall be the incremental date of an officer appointed or promoted to a post in the federal? A, it shall every 12 calendar or promotion. B, December of the year following at least 6 months or promotion. It shall be first January of the year following of the service or promotion. And D, it shall be 31st January of the year following at least 6 months of the service or promotion. Question 11. Deciding whether to impose or recommend withholding or deferment of an increment. The permanent secretary or head of a ministerial office take into account all of the following except A, the gravity of the shortcoming. B, the quality of the officer's previous service. C, the assigned duty of the officer. And then D, you bear in mind that to withhold an increment serious penalty than to defer it. So going to the correct options. So for question 10 that say, what shall be the incremental date of an officer appointed or promoted the federal civil service? Of course, the incremental date is always 1st January the year following at least 6 months of the service or promotion. 1st January of the service, months of the service or promotion. While question, that is option C. While question 11 that says, in deciding whether to impose or withholding or deferment of an permanent secretary or head of a ministerial office, into account all of the following. Okay, now looking at them, it says the gravity, of course it will take into account the gravity of the shortcoming, previous service, of course that will also be account. Then C that said the assigned duty of the officer, no. So the correct option is don't need to take the into account of the officer, assigned duty of the officer. D that says bear in mind that to withhold an increment is more serious penalty. Of course, he has to also bear that note that withholding is more serious than penalty than deferment. So the correct option is so it does not take account into the assigned duty of the officer. So question 12. When is an increment said to be deferred? When is an increment said to be deferred? A. When the decision as to whether or not be granted it is postponed for a specific period. B. When the increment is not granted until the following year. C. When the increment is paid in arrears. And D. When the increment is denied. Question 13. What is the approved duration of deferment of increment? A. Must not be less than 2 months or more than 6 months. B. Must not be less than 3 months nor more than 6 months. C. Maximum of 8 months. D. 4 months. Question 14. When can an officer's increment said to be withheld? A. When it is decided not to grant it and that the officer shall cease to be eligible thereof until his next incremental date. B. When a decision is it after to grant it after 3 to 6 months. And C. When it is decided not to grant it on the 11th until the 11th month of the particular year. When it is decided not to grant until the 11th month of the particular year. Then D. When it is decided not to grant it for the rest of the service years of the officer. So looking at the correct option for question 12, that say when is an increment said to be deferred? So of course an increment is said to be deferred when the decision as to whether or not it should be granted is postponed for a specific period. That is option A. So increment is said to be deferred when the decision as to whether or not it shall be granted is postponed for a specific period. Then for question 13, that say what is the approved duration of deferment of increment? Of course, the approved duration is that it must not be less than 3 months and not more than 6 months. It must not be less than 3 months and not more than 6 months. That is option B. Why for question 13, that say when can an officer's increment said to be withheld? So of course an officer's increment is said to be withheld when it is decided not to grant it and that the officer shall cease to be eligible thereof until his next incremental date. That is option A. Okay, like question 13 appeared 2 times and the answer is given only 2%. So okay, let's say question 12, if that is correct, 12. So the option is when the decision as to whether or not it shall be granted is postponed. Yes. Then the first 13 is the approved duration of deferment, of course, which is not less than 3 months and no more than 6 months. Then the second 13, so it just number. So the second 13, of course, that says when can an officer's increment said to be withheld? Of course, it's said to be withheld when it is decided not to grant it and that the officer shall cease to be eligible thereof until his next. So it's that's A2. That's A2. So question 14. Which of these is not a rule guiding deferment of increment? Which of these is not a rule guiding deferment of increment? So we have A. The period of the deferment must be fixed at the time the increment is deferred. B. The officer whose increment was deferred loses his original incremental date for subsequent increments. C. If the deferment is less than 6 months in the first instance, it may, if necessary, be increased to 6 months by additional specific deferment. Then D. If the deferred increment is eventually granted, it does not become effective until the day following the expiration of the specific period of deferment. So question 15. What is special increments? What is special increments? A. It is one or more increments granted by the Federal Civil Service Commission at a subsequent incremental date to an officer whose increment had been previously withheld, with the effect of raising the salary of the officer to or towards the level it would have reached if the previous withholding had not occurred. B. It is a special award by the President to a meritorious officer at a subsequent incremental date. C. It is given in recognition of an officer's hard work. And D. It is increment restored with retrospective effect in consequence of improved service during a later increment earning period. So quickly looking at the correct options. So question 14 that says, which of these is not a rule guiding deferment of increment? Of course, in deferment of increment, option A is applicable. So the period of deferment must be fixed. Of course, from the time you are deferring, it must be the time must be fixed. Then B that says the officer whose increment was deferred loses his original increment. No, this is not true. So the officer does not lose his original incremental date. So this is not the rule, because the officer still maintains his original incremental date for the subsequent years, for the subsequent increment. Then for question 15 that says, what is special increments? So the correct option is A. It is one or more increments granted by Federal Civil Service Commission at a subsequent incremental date to an officer whose increment had been previously withheld, with the effect of raising the salary of the officer to or towards the level it would have been if the previous withholding had not occurred. So of course, that is to mitigate the effect of withholding increment. So that is option A. So question 14 is option B and 15 is A. Question 16. Immediately on deciding to restore an increment which had earlier been withdrawn or deferred, who shall bring the decision to the notice of the officer? So whose responsibility is it to bring the decision to the notice of the officer? A. The departmental director. B. The permanent secretary or head of examination. Then C. The finance department. D. The salaries and wages committee. And question 17. Question 17. All decisions on deferment or withholding of increment and stoppage of salaries shall be communicated within 2 weeks to all of the following except. So where should the communication of a stoppage of salary, withholding or increment be communicated to? A. Office of the head of Office of the Auditor General of the Federation, Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, Office of the Civil Service Commission, then D. The officer concerned. So which of them is not correct? So that means where should communication not necessarily to be made to? So for the correct options for question 16 that says immediately on deciding to restore an increment which had earlier been withdrawn or deferred, who shall it be to who shall bring the decision to the notice of the officer? So the person that will bring the notice to the officer is the permanent secretary or head of extraministerial office. That is option B. So the permanent secretary or head of extraministerial office has to notify the officer on the decision to restore the increment which had earlier been withdrawn or deferred. So while question 17 that says all decisions on deferment or withholding of increment or page of salary shall be communicated within 2 weeks to all of the following except. Okay, So all of the following except option C is that Office of the Auditor General for the Federation. Yes, of course, it has to be communicated to Office of the Auditor General of the Federation. Option B says the Office of Accountant General of the Federation. Office of Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. Then option C says Office of the Civil Service Commission. No, it's not necessary to communicate to Office of the Civil Service Commission. And then D says the officer concerned. Definitely officer concerned must be communicated to. And option E says Office of the Head of Civil Service of the Federation. Of course, Office of the Head of Civil Service of the Federation has to be communicated to. So the correct option is option C. So it shall be communicated to all of them except Office of the Civil Service Commission. So that's question 17. So thank you. That brings us to the end of the lesson, emoluments and increments. So kindly, if you are yet to hit the subscribe button, look around your screen as you are closing. If you are still seeing subscribe there, kindly hit on the subscribed button, and that is to enable you have our materials free of charge. Also, give us a thumb up, like us, click the like button, give us a thumb up. Then we'll be glad also to have your comments. And of course, if this material is of value to you, it will also be of value to your friends and colleagues, anybody around you. Kindly share to them as well to benefit from it. So what is the next? On our next topic, we shall be treating prescribed examination for confirmation. Prescribed examination formation. So always check our channel to know when it is out. So see you in the next video. Thank you.